By the final winter of the Second World War, Germany was fighting with ghosts. The once invincible Luftwaffe had become a scatter of desperate pilots and unfinished dreams. Factories bombed, fuel gone, runways cratered. But in the shadows of collapse, a few engineers were building machines that looked like they'd fallen from another century. Among them were the brothers Reimar and Walter Horton, glider geniuses who believed that the future of flight lay in a wing with no body at all. Their latest creation, the Ho 229, was a flying wing jet fighter faster than anything the Allies could field, invisible to radar experiments, and terrifyingly ahead of its time. It was a weapon that might have rewritten the war if only there'd been time. Time was exactly what Germany had lost. By March 1945, Allied armor was rolling toward the Rhine, and Soviet troops were a few hundred kilometers from Berlin. Orders went out to every research base and test airfield: destroy everything the enemy could use. Blueprints, prototypes, engines, burn them, bury them, erase them. At Oranienburg airfield north of Berlin, one pilot received that order and understood what it meant. He wasn't just told to ground his aircraft, he was told to kill it, to make sure that not a single scrap of Hitler's last secret would survive the Allied advance. His name has been lost to history's noise, buried in paperwork that burned with the Reich. The few remaining fragments identify him only as Testflieger V11, assigned to the Horten experimental unit. What he did on the morning of April 10, 1945, would ensure that no one, neither German nor Allied, would ever see that particular jet again. The pilot. He had been a glider pilot first, like so many of Germany's engineers. Born in 1916 near Augsburg, raised on the stories of Zeppelin pioneers. He joined the Luftwaffe in the early days when flight was still romantic, not yet desperate. By 1933, he was an instructor, teaching new cadets to manage high-performance aircraft under impossible pressure. When the call came for volunteers for special experimental testing, he didn't hesitate. The Horten facility was unlike any other airbase. Hidden within pine forests, the hangars looked more like workshops for artists than factories for war. Inside were curved wooden spars, sheets of composite material made from layers of plywood and carbon dust, a crude form of early stealth design. Engines arrived under guard from Junkers, the UMO 004B, the same power plant used in the May 262. They were delicate, temperamental, and lethal if mishandled. Testflieger V11 had flown both piston and jet aircraft before, but nothing like this. The Horten's cockpit was set deep in the wing. The pilot practically laid down to fly. There was no tailplane, no traditional stability, just instinct and calculation. It was less like flying and more like balancing on a blade of air. On his first taxi run, he realized the ground crews spoke in whispers. Every movement was documented, every flight filmed by cameras mounted on tripods. These were not normal Luftwaffe men, they were scientists in uniforms. They measured heat signatures, radar reflections, and airflow pressures. The Reich was dying, but here, in this tiny enclave of innovation, it was still dreaming of the future. By early 1945, the Horten 22-9 V3 prototype was nearly complete. Wooden wing surfaces blended with metal engine nacelles. Its shape reduced drag so efficiently that it could reach 970 kilometers per hour in level flight, hundreds faster than the fastest Allied fighter. If mass-produced, it might have reversed the air war over Germany. But the Allies had learned of the project through reconnaissance photographs and reports from captured engineers. They were closing in. American armored columns had crossed the Rhine. Every day the thunder of artillery came closer. On April 9th, the order arrived from Berlin, quote, "Prevent capture by any means," unquote. The Horten brothers argued destroying the aircraft would erase years of work, but SS liaisons on site made it clear obedience was not optional. That night, Testflieger V-11 couldn't sleep. He walked the line of half-finished airframes, touching the smooth plywood surfaces, listening to the ticking of cooling metal. He'd poured everything into this machine, and tomorrow he would destroy it himself. He considered disobeying, flying west, surrendering to the Americans like other test pilots had done. But he knew the Allied bombers would never let him through alive, and even if they did, the Gestapo would reach his family first. The safest way to protect them and the project was to vanish it completely.
Just before dawn, he signed out a flight log under routine maintenance authorization. Ground crews fueled the aircraft, assuming he was conducting a systems check. At 05:27 hours, the twin Jumo engines screamed to life. For a moment, the forest echoed with the sound of the future. He took off to the east, climbing into a sky bruised with smoke. Witnesses on the ground saw the craft make 2 wide circuits, then bank hard toward the rising sun. They thought it was a standard test run. It wasn't. At 06:03, radar operators at a nearby flak station reported a single unidentified contact climbing sharply to 9,000 meters, then a flash. Minutes later, debris rained down over a 10-kilometer stretch of woodland. No enemy aircraft were in the area. The Horten prototype had exploded in mid-air. Whether by self-destruct charge, cannon fire, or deliberate engine failure, no one could say. When investigators reached the site, they found twisted metal, scorched plywood, and 1 intact oxygen mask. The cockpit canopy was shattered outward, not inward. There was no trace of the pilot. Some said he ejected before the blast. Others believed he had aimed the jet upward, then fired a flare pistol into the fuel line. All that was certain was that Germany's most advanced aircraft would never fly again.
For years, Allied intelligence would wonder why so few Horten prototypes survived intact. They found one unfinished frame at a different airfield, shipped it to the United States, and studied it at Wright Field. But the machine that actually flew, the one that reached near supersonic speed, was gone. In the burned forest outside Oranienburg, local villagers whispered about the wreck for decades. They said the pilot had destroyed it not out of loyalty to Hitler, but out of shame, because he knew what kind of future it promised. A future where wars would be fought too fast for men to matter. By the spring of 1944, the German war machine was collapsing faster than it could rebuild. Fuel was scarce, factories burned under endless bombing raids, and the Reich's armies, once unstoppable, were now retreating across every front. But deep inside the Harz Mountains, hidden beneath layers of concrete and secrecy, engineers and pilots were still chasing something extraordinary. They were building a machine meant to defy the impossible,
a warplane so advanced that, if completed, it could turn the tide of the air war overnight. This was Project Firelight, a hybrid of glider, rocket, and jet, an aircraft designed not for endurance, but for speed and altitude beyond anything the Allies had yet conceived. The Luftwaffe called it the Horten 9, though on paper it appeared under dozens of names to mislead Allied intelligence. To the handful of men who saw it with their own eyes, it looked like something from another world, a flying wing with no fuselage, no tail, and no clear beginning or end. Its twin jet engines were buried inside its body. Its skin was a composite of wood, resin, and carbon dust, a desperate attempt to evade Allied radar. It was a shape born decades too soon, and it was entrusted to a single pilot, Oberleutnant Erich Wendt, a man whose records would later vanish from every Luftwaffe archive. The promise of the impossible. Wendt had been a glider champion before the war, quiet, exacting, methodical. He had none of the swagger of a fighter race, but every engineer trusted him. He could feel air the way others heard music. When he was recruited into the Horten test program, he knew what he was stepping into. The Reich was bleeding men and machines, but within the underground assembly halls of Gotha, the dream of an invincible aircraft still burned bright. Engineers whispered that Hitler himself had seen the blueprints. He'd been shown sketches of a plane that could reach London in 20 minutes and return before British radar could react. The Führer called it Wunderwaffe, a miracle weapon. And like so many miracles promised in those desperate months, it became both an obsession and a curse. Inside the mountain, the test base at Oranienburg was gone, bombed flat. So the remaining prototypes were moved underground into a new complex codenamed Voldwerk Süd. It was a labyrinth carved into solid rock, built by slave labor under the SS's supervision. Inside those tunnels, Wendt made his daily rounds, checking the curved wing panels, feeling for warps, inspecting the jet intakes for hairline cracks. Every piece was fragile. Every gram of aluminum had been scavenged from destroyed Messerschmitts. Yet even so, the Horten brothers swore the aircraft could fly, and Wendt, cautious as he was, believed them. The numbers. Its specifications read like fiction. Maximum speed 970 kilometers per hour. Ceiling 52,000 feet. Operational range 1,000 kilometers. No propeller aircraft in the world could match it. The Allies were barely fielding their first jet squadrons, the Meter and the P-80. But the Horten's flying wing design, aerodynamically perfect, could theoretically outpace them all. What frightened Allied planners was not what the plane was, it was what it could become. Radar operators reported strange echoes, ghost blips that vanished mid-sweep. Night fighter pilots swore they'd seen black shapes streaking over the Rhine with no visible engines or exhaust. To them, it was a phantom. To Berlin, it was salvation, or at least the illusion of it.
The secrecy. The SS handled the program's outer perimeter. The Luftwaffe's high command didn't even know how many prototypes existed. Only one, Wendt's, was rumored to be complete enough for flight. Every blueprint was kept under triple lock. Each engineer signed oaths of silence enforced by threat of deportation to the camps they passed each morning. No Allied reconnaissance photo had ever captured the true shape of the aircraft, until much later. And yet, in a twist of irony, the very secrecy that kept the Horten safe also sealed its fate.
Because by early 1945, communication between Berlin, the SS, and the Luftwaffe had disintegrated completely. Units acted on rumor. No one knew who commanded what anymore. When the Allies crossed the Rhine in March, the order finally came down from above. No advanced weapons are to fall into enemy hands. All prototypes are to be destroyed. But at Waldwerk Süd, destruction wasn't so simple. The tunnels were too deep, the aircraft too delicate to burn. And for Erich Wendt, the idea of simply smashing what he had spent years perfecting was unthinkable. The dilemma. Wendt's logbook from March 15, 1945, one of the last known entries, was brief, almost cryptic. Test preparation complete, awaiting instruction, engines calibrated, airframe stable. No further notes appear after that. Historians would later find fragments of his handwriting on loose pages recovered from a collapsed tunnel. They will not get it. Not the British, not the Americans. I will decide. From that line forward, everything became speculation, pieced together from testimonies, Allied intelligence briefings, and post-war debriefs of captured German scientists. What we know is this. In the final weeks of the war, as the Allies closed in on the Harz region, Wendt's prototype was fueled, armed the test instruments, and rolled out of the tunnel before dawn. The aircraft's tail number was erased, its insignia overpainted. No one logged the flight. Some said he was ordered to fly it south to Austria. Others claimed he was supposed to deliver it to Berlin for Hitler's personal inspection. But Wendt never arrived anywhere. His flight path, reconstructed decades later from Allied radar logs, suggests he flew northwest directly towards the advancing Americans, and then vanished. The night of March 16, 1945, began like so many in the collapsing Reich. Sirens, smoke, and silence between explosions. But in one forgotten corner of the Harz Mountains, under a frozen dawn, a single engine scream cut through the quiet. It wasn't the steady growl of a propeller. It was higher, thinner, a sound that none of the guards had ever heard before. Inside the hidden airstrip at Waldwerk Süd, Oberleutnant Erich Wendt was climbing into the cockpit of the Horten 9, the final prototype, the only one capable of flight. The ground crew had begged him to wait for orders. Berlin was falling apart. The SS had evacuated 2 days earlier. But Wendt didn't listen. He simply adjusted his oxygen mask, sealed the canopy, and gave a single thumbs up through the glass. At 04:47 a.m., the prototype rolled down the crude frozen runway, flames spitting from its buried jet intakes. The wooden wings flexed, then silence. It lifted off. No one had ever seen anything like it. The Horten 9 didn't climb. It slid into the sky, vanishing into the low clouds, leaving no visible trail. The radar ghost. At 05:02 a.m., Allied radar stations in Belgium registered something they couldn't explain. A fast-moving echo, no transponder, no identification, altitude near 12,000 meters. Too fast for a piston engine, too slow for a V2. It crossed the Rhine and turned west. The operators marked it down as a glitch. They had seen ghosts before. But then 5 minutes later, another station further north caught the same echo. One British officer reportedly muttered, "Either Jerry's found himself a new toy, or that's one bloody fast bird." At 5:18, the signal vanished completely, somewhere over the Dutch border. No crash was reported, no wreckage was found. It was as if the plane had simply dissolved into thin air. The capture that wasn't. 2 days later, American infantry from the 104th Division reached the outskirts of Nordhausen. They captured several engineers from the Horten project, including one of the assistants who had prepared Wendt's aircraft. His interrogation transcript, declassified in 1972, reads like something out of a spy thriller. Interrogator: where was the prototype sent? Engineer: it was flown away, northwest direction. Pilot was Wendt. Interrogator: did he defect? Engineer: he said he wanted to save it. He said the design must live, even if Germany dies. When the Americans pressed for details, where he could have landed, how much fuel he had, what his destination was, the engineer broke down. He told us he would find the side that deserved it more.
The unmarked wreck. On April 5, 1945, 3 weeks after that mysterious radar sighting, a British reconnaissance patrol in Western Holland found a crash site in a drained field near Zuidbroek. No insignia, no serial number. The aircraft was broken in half, its nose buried deep in the mud. The locals who had seen it fall said it came in low, silent, trailing smoke but no fire. Then it simply disintegrated. The pilot's remains were never recovered, only fragments of a flight suit and a shattered oxygen mask. RAF investigators noted one chilling detail. The wreckage's shape didn't match any known German aircraft. One officer even wrote in the margin, "This is either a hoax or something entirely new." The pieces were quietly collected and sent to a classified depot in Farnborough. There, the fragments sat for years, unlabeled, until one American engineer recognized the structure in 1946. The spark in America. That engineer's name was Jack Northrop. He had been experimenting with flying wing designs since the 1930s, but struggled to make them stable. When he saw the recovered Horten components, particularly the all-wing frame and the carbon-infused coating, he knew what it meant. This was confirmation that his own dream was possible. The Germans had done it first, and now, thanks to one vanished pilot, the United States had the blueprint for what would become the foundation of every stealth aircraft built for the next 50 years. The Horten 9, recovered in fragments, rebuilt in secret, would eventually inspire the B-2 Spirit, the most advanced stealth bomber in the world. Its curved shape, its buried engines, its invisible radar signature, all traced back to that lost prototype and the mysterious flight that no one was supposed to see. The forgotten file. In 1998, the U.S. National Archives declassified a folder marked Captured Luftwaffe Jet, Haas Region, March 1945. Inside were blurred photos, pieces of wood-metal composite, and one haunting note handwritten in German. Der Himmel gehört keinem Land, nur dem, der zuerstem hinaufkommt. The sky belongs to no country, only to the one who reaches it first. The note was signed simply, E. Wendt. To this day, no one knows whether the message was written before the flight or after. March 1945. Germany was collapsing, one burning city at a time. Every morning, more refugees filled the roads, more soldiers vanished into the east, and more officers pretended the war could somehow still be won. Inside the underground facility near Nordhausen, the last meeting of the Horten team was held under a bare bulb and a portrait of the Führer that no one bothered to straighten anymore. An officer from the SS Research Division had arrived with written orders stamped in crimson wax. He read them aloud as though reciting a prayer. All advanced aircraft prototypes are to be destroyed before capture. No design, no engine, no material will fall into enemy hands. All personnel with knowledge of these projects will be reassigned to front duty or executed. The engineers said nothing. They knew the Allies were less than 100 kilometers away. They knew the Americans had already reached the Rhine. But Oberleutnant Erich Wendt, the test pilot, did not stand still. He turned away from the officer, stared at the covered silhouette of the jet under its canvas top,
and made a decision that would change history. When the meeting broke, the SS man ordered the hangar sealed. Within 24 hours, demolition crews would plant charges on the structure. The project, what remained of it, was supposed to disappear. But that night, Wendt returned alone. He cut the lock with a torch, rolled back the tarp, and looked at the plane as if he was staring into the face of a dying civilization. It was beautiful, even in the half-light, sleek, unfinished, painted in the pale grey used for secrecy flights. Its wooden skin was smooth, still warm to the touch from the work done earlier that day. This wasn't a weapon anymore. It was the last fragment of an idea, that flight could still mean progress, not destruction. He opened the maintenance logbook and wrote only one line beneath the final entry. "If they will burn it, I will save it my own way." The flight. At dawn, the airfield was a smear of fog and coal dust. The guards had been reassigned during the night. The communications truck was gone. Only 2 mechanics remained, men who had followed Wendt since the early glider tests. They understood, without words, what he intended to do. One of them handed him a small envelope sealed with wax. "Coordinates," he said, "if you make it." Wendt slipped it into his jacket. The start sequence was simple but deadly. Prime the fuel pumps, engage the jet turbine, and pray that the wooden wings didn't catch fire. He strapped in, set the trim, and felt the cold bite of the harness across his chest. At 5:42 a.m., the engine came alive, a roar that seemed to tear the valley open. The aircraft lurched forward, wheels bouncing over frost-hard earth, then lifted, climbing into grey cloud. Below him, the forest swallowed the base. No one followed, no one could. For the first 10 minutes, the flight recorder ticked normally. Speed, 870 kilometers per hour. Altitude, 9,000 meters. Direction, northwest. He knew the Allied lines were already mapped. He could see artillery flashes in the distance, like tiny electrical storms across the horizon. He banked left, crossed the Rhine, and kept climbing. His plan, if it could be called that, was to reach neutral territory, maybe Switzerland or Sweden. But even he knew the range was impossible. The twin BMW engines had less than an hour of fuel. At 5:05 a.m., Allied radar picked him up. British observers near Antwerp reported a dark shape, no contrail, moving too fast for pursuit. They scrambled 2 Tempests from an emergency strip, but they never found him.
At 6:12, something changed. The engine temperature spiked. The starboard turbine coughed once, then again. Wendt throttled back, stabilizing at 7,000 meters. He was still inside German airspace. Below him, the landscape was chaos. Columns of armor retreating, civilians flooding every road. He looked down and saw the nation he'd fought for dissolving into ash. And that was when the radio came alive. To all Luftwaffe personnel, by order of the Reich Command, prototype aircraft are to be destroyed immediately. No exceptions. Static. Then the same message repeated. Destroy them all. Wendt's hands tightened on the control stick. He didn't speak, didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the horizon and whispered to himself, "Then I'll destroy mine my way." He began to climb again, straight up, pushing the jet until the frame groaned. At 11,000 meters, the right engine flamed out. At 12,000, the left began to fail. The gauges blurred from vibration. Witnesses on the ground later reported a contrail splitting the morning sky, then vanishing as if cut by an invisible knife. Some said they saw an explosion. Others swore the craft simply folded its wings and fell without fire. No wreckage was found in Germany, but 3 days later, fragments matching the Horten's wooden alloy were discovered in a Dutch bog, scattered across 200 meters. No human remains, no parachute, just fragments. The aftermath.
The war ended 7 weeks later. Germany surrendered, and the race for its secrets began. American intelligence teams moved faster than armies. Under Operation Lusty, specialists from the U.S. Air Technical Service Command fanned out across occupied territory, hunting anything that could give them an edge in the new post-war world: rockets, jets, nuclear physics. At one depot, near the Harz Mountains, they found what remained of the Horten project: 2 unfinished wings, a fuselage skeleton, and a half-melted flight recorder. Inside the recorder, soaked but still legible, were the final coordinates transmitted from Wendt's aircraft. They pointed to the north of Netherlands, the same region where that unmarked wreck had been sighted. A recovery team was dispatched. They found small pieces, composite fragments, sections of control cable, and 1 aluminum plate etched with serial code V3-001A. A number that didn't exist in any Luftwaffe registry. Those fragments were shipped quietly to the United States. The paperwork was marked experimental, non-existent aircraft. For the next decade, the design would resurface in classified meetings, in prototypes that bore familiar silhouettes, but new names: the Northrop YB-49, the XB-35, and later, whispers of a shadow project in the Nevada desert. When asked about it in 1949, Jack Northrop famously told a reporter, "Every idea has a father. Sometimes you just don't know his name." The shadow of Wendt. 50 years after the war, a curator at the Smithsonian's restoration facility opened a long-sealed crate labeled "Captured German Jet Components." Inside were warped sheets of laminated wood and a single instrument dial frozen at 11,800 meters. Taped to the back of the gauge was a faded note in German handwriting: "Nicht für Glum, für Erinnerung." Not for glory, for remembrance. The curator traced the signature at the bottom. It matched a personnel file from 1945. Oberleutnant Erich Wendt, missing, presumed dead. Today, a single preserved wing of the Horten H-229 rests in a museum in Washington, D.C. Visitors walk past it without realizing that every stealth aircraft flying overhead carries part of its DNA. And perhaps in some unmarked grave beneath the soil of Northern Europe lies the man who made sure the secret survived, not for a tyrant, but for the future. Because in the final days of the Reich, one pilot chose not obedience, not surrender, but silence. He shot down his own creation so that its power would never again serve destruction. And in doing so, he ensured that the dream of invisible flight would live on, not as a weapon of domination, but as a symbol of what vision can endure even in ruin.